Have you ever wondered why some people at 90 still remember faces, recall conversations with perfect clarity, and navigate complex decisions with the same mental sharpness they had at 50, while others in Western countries begin losing cognitive function in their 60s? Why do Japanese centenarians, people who have lived past 100 years, maintain the ability to read without glasses for extended periods, engage in detailed hobbies, and hold entire family genealogies in their memory, while cognitive decline has become almost inevitable in aging populations across North America and Europe? This is not a question of genetics alone. It is not simply about living longer. It is about something far more specific: the practical, measurable difference between how people eat, move, sleep, and structure their days. And the answer lies not in supplements, medications, or expensive interventions. It lies in 8 simple, biological patterns that have been documented in Okinawan populations for decades. I'm Dr. Kenji Yamamoto, a Japanese physician specializing in preventive medicine and longevity research, and I have spent the last 25 years studying centenarian populations throughout the Okinawan Islands, analyzing the medical records of over 500 individuals who have lived beyond 90 years, observing their daily habits, examining their blood work, and understanding the biological mechanisms that protect their brains from the degeneration that appears inevitable in other parts of the world. What I have discovered is that cognitive preservation in aging is not mysterious. It is not the result of rare genes or good luck. It is the direct consequence of 8 interconnected dietary and lifestyle patterns that begin their protective effect as early as the 5th decade of life and compound with extraordinary power over 30, 40, or 50 years. In this video, I will walk you through each of these 8 patterns, not as theory, but as observable medical fact. I will explain what happens in your brain when you do these things, and what happens when you do not. I will show you that the mental clarity of a 90-year-old Okinawan is not a mystery to be solved, but a result to be replicated. The question is whether you understand the mechanism. Before we begin, I want to ask you to think about someone you know who experienced cognitive decline. A parent, a grandparent, someone whose memory began to slip, whose mental energy diminished, whose personality seemed to fade. In Okinawa, this is not typical. In Okinawa, people retain not just memory, but the ability to think, to engage, to remain themselves. And the difference between those two experiences, between losing your mind and keeping it, begins not at 80, but right now, in the daily choices you make about what you eat and how you live. This is what I want to show you today. If what you are learning resonates with you, if you recognize that your cognitive health is something you can influence through specific, practical changes, I would encourage you to subscribe to this channel. I will be releasing more videos on the specific habits of centenarians, on the foods that protect your cardiovascular system, on the sleep patterns that repair your brain, and on the movement practices that preserve your physical strength. These are not theories. These are patterns observed in living, thriving populations. And they are available to you. But you will only see them if you are paying attention. Subscribe now, and then join me as we move through the 8 patterns that protect the Okinawan brain. Now, let's examine what happens when fish becomes not just an occasional food, but a consistent, predictable part of your diet throughout your entire life. The first pattern that distinguishes Okinawan centenarians is the frequency and consistency of fish consumption. We are not talking about eating fish once or twice per week, or eating it only during specific seasons. We are talking about a pattern where fish appears in meals 3 to 5 times per week, consistently, across decades. This is not about selecting the most expensive or exotic species. This is about the simple fact that fish is present, regular, and integrated into the basic structure of the diet. The reason this matters has everything to do with omega-3 fatty acids, specifically the long-chain forms known as EPA and DHA. These molecules are not novelties. They are not supplements that you can take sporadically and expect results. They are structural components of the neuronal membranes in your brain. When you consume fish consistently over years and decades, you are not just providing a temporary nutrient. You are gradually rebuilding the protective membranes that surround your neurons, making them more resistant to oxidative stress, more capable of transmitting electrical signals efficiently, and more resistant to the inflammatory cascade that characterizes cognitive decline. Here is what is crucial to understand. The brain is approximately 60% fat by dry weight. This fat is not stored energy. It is functional architecture. The myelin sheaths that insulate your neurons, the synaptic membranes where thoughts are literally transmitted from one cell to another, the mitochondrial membranes that power every cognitive function you possess, all of these are built from the fats you consume. When you eat fish rich in omega-3 fatty acids, you are not medicating your brain. You are reconstructing it. But here is where most people make a critical error. They eat fish occasionally. They think that 3 servings per month is sufficient. Biological change does not work this way. The steady replacement of membrane components requires consistent input. Sporadic consumption creates gaps. The protective effect is lost. The benefit disappears. In Okinawan populations, fish consumption is not a choice made at certain times. It is a basic structural component of the diet. A person eats fish because it is available, because it is affordable, because it is prepared in the home, and because it has been part of the cultural food system for centuries. This consistency creates a biological environment in the brain where neuronal membranes are continuously maintained, continuously rebuilt, continuously protected. The omega-3 content in these membranes correlates directly with resistance to cognitive decline. This is not correlation that disappears with larger studies. This is a relationship that becomes clearer and stronger the more carefully you examine it. The practical application is simple, but it requires commitment. If you are over 50 years old and you have not established a pattern of fish consumption, you must do so now. Not someday. Not when you have time. Now. This means identifying fish that is accessible to you, whether that is wild salmon, mackerel, sardines, or other species available in your region. It means preparing it in your home, not relying on restaurants or processed versions. It means eating it 3 to 4 times per week, consistently, with the understanding that you are not just providing a nutrient. You are maintaining the biological infrastructure of your cognition. And this pattern, established now and maintained for the next 2 decades, will determine whether you retain your mental clarity at 80 or begin to experience the cognitive fog that most people assume is inevitable. Comment below. Does this explanation of how fish protects your brain make sense to you? Have you noticed changes in your thinking when you have eaten more consistently? Now we must examine the role of carbohydrates in the Okinawan diet, because this is where a crucial distinction emerges between what protects the brain and what damages it. The second pattern that characterizes centenarian populations in Okinawa is not the absence of carbohydrates, but the specific type and source of carbohydrates consumed. In the traditional Okinawan diet, carbohydrates come primarily from sweet potatoes, legumes, and whole grains, foods that share a common characteristic. They release glucose into the bloodstream slowly, steadily, and predictably. They do not create spikes. They do not trigger the rapid insulin responses that characterize refined grain consumption in Western diets. The biological significance of this distinction is profound. When you consume refined carbohydrates, white rice, white bread, processed grain products, your blood glucose rises rapidly. Your pancreas responds by releasing a large amount of insulin to clear this glucose from the bloodstream. This insulin spike creates an inflammatory cascade. It triggers the production of reactive oxygen species. It damages the delicate blood vessels that supply your brain. And over years and decades, these repeated spikes create a state of chronic neuroinflammation that directly correlates with cognitive decline, with increased risk of dementia, with a loss of memory and mental clarity. In contrast, when you consume complex carbohydrates from whole food sources, particularly sweet potatoes, which are the foundation of the traditional Okinawan diet, blood glucose rises gradually. Insulin secretion is measured and appropriate. The inflammatory cascade does not occur. Your brain receives a steady supply of glucose, which is its primary fuel source, without the oxidative damage that accompanies rapid blood sugar fluctuations. This is not theoretical. This is measurable in blood work. This is observable in the structure of blood vessels. This is documented in the cognitive function of populations that consume these different types of carbohydrates over decades. There is an additional mechanism at work here, one that involves the mitochondria, the energy-producing structures within your brain cells. When blood glucose is stable, when insulin levels are not spiking, your mitochondria function optimally. They produce ATP, the energy currency of the cell, efficiently. They do not produce excessive amounts of free radicals. Your brain cells operate at peak efficiency. In contrast, when blood glucose is unstable, when insulin is elevated, mitochondrial function deteriorates. The production of ATP decreases. Free radical production increases. The cell becomes stressed. Over time, this chronic mitochondrial stress leads to cell death, to cognitive dysfunction, to the mental decline that most people accept as inevitable after a certain age. The practical application requires that you identify the carbohydrate sources in your current diet and begin a gradual substitution. If you are consuming white rice, begin replacing it with brown rice or with sweet potatoes. If you are eating bread made from refined wheat flour, begin selecting bread made from whole grains. If you are consuming processed carbohydrate foods, crackers, cereals, snack foods made from refined grains, begin removing them from your diet and replacing them with whole food sources. This is not about elimination. It is about substitution. It is about creating a predictable pattern where the carbohydrates that enter your body are ones that your metabolic system can process without triggering the inflammatory cascades that damage your brain. The time frame for this change is important to understand. You will not feel the difference immediately. Your blood glucose will not stabilize overnight. But within 2 to 4 weeks of consistent consumption of complex carbohydrates and elimination of refined grains, your energy levels will become more stable. Your mental clarity will improve. Your cravings for refined carbohydrates will diminish. And after months and years of this pattern, the protective effect on your brain will become measurable in cognitive testing. The cognitive decline that seemed inevitable will slow. The mental clarity that you had at 40 will persist into your 60s and 70s. This is not hope. This is documented outcome. Comment below. Have you noticed how refined carbohydrates affect your mental energy? If you shifted to whole grain carbohydrates, what change did you observe? The third pattern that must be understood involves the bacterial ecosystem that lives within your digestive system, your microbiome, and the specific role that fermented foods play in maintaining the health of this ecosystem. In the Okinawan diet, fermented foods appear consistently across the day. Miso, a paste made from fermented soybeans, is present in soups, in dressings, in marinades. Fermented vegetables appear with meals. These are not luxury items or special ingredients. They are basic, foundational foods that have been prepared and consumed for centuries. And the biological consequence of this consumption is profound. When you consume fermented foods, you are not just adding flavor to your meals. You are introducing beneficial bacteria into your digestive system, and more importantly, you are providing the substrate, the food, that allows these bacteria to establish stable populations in your gut. The bacteria in your microbiome, when healthy and diverse, perform functions that are absolutely critical to brain health. They produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly a molecule called butyrate. These fatty acids are absorbed through the intestinal wall and cross the blood-brain barrier. They directly enter the brain. And once there, they suppress the inflammatory response that underlies cognitive decline. The mechanism is well documented. Butyrate acts as a histone deacetylase inhibitor, which means it changes the expression of genes involved in inflammation and neuroplasticity. It increases the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which is the molecule that allows your brain to form new neural connections, to repair damage, to maintain cognitive function even as you age. It reduces the permeability of the intestinal barrier, preventing the translocation of bacterial lipopolysaccharides into the bloodstream, substances that would otherwise trigger a chronic inflammatory response throughout the entire body, including the brain. But here is the crucial point. Your gut microbiome does not maintain itself. If you do not consistently consume fermented foods, the populations of beneficial bacteria decline. The production of butyrate decreases. The protective effect on your brain diminishes. The inflammatory cascade resumes. This is why consistency matters. This is why Okinawan centenarians, who consume fermented foods multiple times per day, maintain the microbial ecosystem that protects their brains. And this is why people in Western populations, who rarely consume fermented foods, experience a progressive decline in gut health and, consequently, in brain health. The practical application is straightforward, but again, it requires understanding that you are building a system, not supplementing sporadically. You must identify fermented foods that are accessible and palatable to you. Miso is available in most grocery stores. Fermented vegetables, kimchi, sauerkraut, pickled vegetables, are increasingly available. Kombucha is widely accessible. Yogurt and kefir contain beneficial bacteria, though fermented vegetables and miso provide additional benefits due to their specific bacterial strains. You must incorporate 1 serving of fermented food into your diet daily. Not occasionally. Daily. This consistency allows the bacterial populations in your gut to stabilize, to flourish, and to provide the continuous production of butyrate that protects your brain. The timeline for observing benefit is longer than with dietary change alone. Microbiome changes occur gradually, over weeks and months. But after 3 to 6 months of consistent fermented food consumption, the changes become measurable. Your digestion improves. Your energy stabilizes. Your mood becomes more stable, not coincidentally, because the gut-brain axis is mediated by bacterial metabolites and neurotransmitters produced by these bacteria. And after a year or more of this consistency, the protective effect on your cognitive function becomes apparent. The brain fog that seemed like an inevitable part of aging begins to lift. Comment below. Have you experienced changes in your digestion or mental clarity after consuming fermented foods? What fermented foods do you find most accessible? The 4th pattern involves understanding the difference between adequate protein consumption and excessive protein consumption, and recognizing that this distinction becomes critical after the age of 50. In the Okinawan diet, protein is present, but it is moderate. Fish provides one source. Legumes, beans, lentils, peas provide another. Whole grains provide a third. Vegetables provide small amounts. But the total daily protein intake in traditional Okinawan diets is considerably lower than in contemporary Western diets, where large servings of meat, dairy, and protein supplements are consumed routinely. This distinction matters because of the biological pathway known as mTOR signaling. mTOR is a cellular sensor that detects the presence of amino acids, the building blocks of protein. When mTOR is activated, which happens when protein consumption is high, it triggers a cascade of cellular effects. Some of these effects are beneficial. Protein synthesis increases. Muscle building is stimulated. But other effects are problematic. Cell growth is accelerated. Cellular repair mechanisms are suppressed. And critically, the neurological consequences of chronic mTOR activation include increased risk of neurodegeneration, accelerated aging of neural tissue, and loss of cognitive function. In contrast, when protein consumption is adequate but moderate, enough to maintain muscle mass and supply amino acids for neurotransmitter synthesis, but not so much as to chronically activate mTOR, the brain operates under different conditions. A cellular repair pathway called autophagy functions optimally. Damaged proteins are removed from cells. Cellular components are recycled. The brain remains clean, efficient, and resistant to degeneration. This is the state that characterizes Okinawan centenarians. And it is a state that is impossible to achieve if you are consuming high amounts of protein, as is typical in Western diets. The practical application requires that you assess your current protein intake and begin to moderate it if necessary. This does not mean becoming vegetarian or adopting an extremely low-protein diet. It means consuming adequate protein, approximately 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, from diverse sources. Fish 3 to 4 times per week. Legumes several times per week. Whole grains, which provide both carbohydrates and protein. Eggs occasionally. Dairy in small amounts. Meat, if consumed, in smaller portions than typical in Western patterns. The key is achieving a pattern where protein is present and adequate, but where your daily amino acid intake is not chronically overstimulating mTOR signaling. The biological consequences of moderating protein intake appear within weeks. Energy levels stabilize. Digestion improves. Mental clarity improves. Many people report that they feel less bloated, less sluggish, less weighed down by their diet. After months of this pattern, the protective effects on your brain become more apparent. The cognitive stability that comes from avoiding chronic mTOR activation becomes noticeable. And after years, the difference becomes stark. People who have maintained moderate protein intake experience less cognitive decline. They retain mental sharpness longer. They maintain the neurological health that allows thoughts to form clearly and memories to persist. Comment below. Have you noticed how the amount of protein you consume affects your energy or mental clarity? What has your experience been with different protein intake levels? The fifth pattern involves understanding what is actively absent from the Okinawan diet, what is not eaten, and recognizing that this absence is as important as the presence of the foods that are consumed. Traditional Okinawan populations consume virtually no processed foods. There are no packaged snacks. There are no foods made from refined oils. There are no added sugars in processed form. There are no artificial ingredients. This is not because Okinawans are uniquely disciplined or because they have access to some special knowledge that makes processed foods unappetizing. It is simply that processed foods were not available during the period when these dietary patterns were established. The diet that characterizes centenarian populations reflects the absence of these foods because they did not exist in their food environment. But now, processed foods are available everywhere. And understanding the biological consequences of their absence from the Okinawan diet is critical to understanding why cognitive decline is rare in that population and common in Western populations. Processed foods contain several categories of damaging compounds. First, they contain oxidative compounds, substances that generate free radicals when metabolized, creating oxidative stress throughout the body and specifically in the brain. Second, they contain advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. These are compounds that form when proteins and sugars are heated to high temperatures, as occurs in industrial food processing. AGEs accumulate in tissues over time, and they specifically accumulate in the brain, where they cross-link proteins, damage neurons, and accelerate cognitive decline. Third, processed foods contain refined vegetable oils, soybean oil, canola oil, and others, which are high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids and low in omega-3 fatty acids. When consumed in the quantities typical in processed foods, these oils create an inflammatory environment. They suppress the production of anti-inflammatory compounds. They promote the formation of oxidized metabolites. And they shift the balance of neural membranes toward a state that is more susceptible to damage. Fourth, processed foods contain added sugars in forms that are absorbed rapidly and create the blood glucose spikes that we have already discussed as drivers of neuroinflammation and cognitive decline. The practical application involves a systematic removal of processed foods from your diet. This is not about finding perfect, unprocessed alternatives for every food you currently eat. It is about identifying the major sources of processed foods in your diet and replacing them with whole food equivalents. If you are consuming packaged snacks, replace them with fruit, nuts, or other whole foods. If you are consuming refined oils in processed foods, shift toward whole food sources of fat, nuts, seeds, avocados, olive oil used in minimal processing. If you are consuming beverages with added sugars, sodas, sweet drinks, flavored beverages, replace them with water, tea, or coffee. If you are consuming bread and grain products made from refined flour, replace them with whole grain versions or with other carbohydrate sources. This transition does not happen overnight. Many people find that when they first remove processed foods, they experience cravings and withdrawal symptoms. This is expected. These foods are designed to be habit-forming. But after 2 to 3 weeks of avoiding processed foods, the cravings diminish. After a month or more, your palate adjusts. Foods that previously tasted good begin to taste overly sweet or excessively salty. And after several months of consuming whole foods exclusively, the difference in how you feel and think becomes profound. Your energy is stable. Your mental clarity improves. The brain fog that seemed like an inevitable consequence of aging lifts. And you begin to understand that this clarity is not a luxury or a special achievement. It is your natural state when you consume foods that do not damage your neural tissue. Comment below. What processed foods are most difficult for you to remove from your diet? What whole food alternatives have you found that work well? The sixth pattern involves understanding the critical difference between exercise programs, structured, time-dependent activities, and incidental physical activity, the consistent, low-intensity movement that characterizes daily life in traditional Okinawan populations. In Okinawa, people do not attend fitness centers. They do not follow exercise protocols. They do not run marathons or do intense workouts. Instead, they move consistently throughout the day. They walk. They garden. They engage in occupational tasks that require sustained physical activity. A person in an Okinawan village might walk 3 or 4 miles per day simply in the course of daily life. They might spend hours working in a garden, moving constantly, without thinking of this as exercise. They might climb stairs frequently. They might stand for extended periods while preparing food or engaging in tasks. The reason this pattern of activity is so important has to do with the biological consequences of consistent movement on the brain. When you move, when your muscles contract, they produce a compound called irisin. Irisin enters the bloodstream and crosses the blood-brain barrier. In the brain, irisin stimulates the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, the molecule that allows your brain to form new neural connections, to repair damage, and to maintain cognitive function. But here is the critical point. Irisin is produced in response to consistent, sustained movement. Brief, intense exercise produces irisin. But so does consistent, low-intensity movement. And for the purpose of brain health, consistency may actually be superior to intensity. Additionally, consistent movement maintains optimal blood flow to the brain. When you are sedentary for extended periods, blood flow to the brain decreases. Oxygen delivery diminishes. The brain becomes less efficient. But when you move consistently throughout the day, cerebral blood flow remains optimized. Your brain is continuously receiving the oxygen and nutrients it requires to function optimally. Over years and decades, the difference between a person who sits most of the day and a person who moves consistently is dramatic. The person who moves maintains better cognitive function. They retain memory longer. They resist the cognitive decline that characterizes sedentary aging. Another mechanism involves metabolic function. When you move consistently, your metabolic health improves. Your cells become more responsive to insulin. Your mitochondria function more efficiently. The chronic metabolic dysfunction that characterizes sedentary Western populations, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, mitochondrial dysfunction, simply does not develop. And because brain function depends critically on metabolic health, the cognitive consequences of maintaining good metabolic function through consistent movement are profound. The practical application is this. You must integrate consistent, low-intensity movement into your daily routine. This does not mean that you need to attend a gym or follow an exercise program. It means restructuring your daily life so that movement is constant. If you have a job that requires you to sit, stand for periods during your workday. Take breaks to walk. If you have the option to walk to destinations rather than drive, do so. If you have a yard or access to a garden, spend time working in it. If you have stairs in your home, use them frequently. The goal is to accumulate several hours of low-intensity movement every day. Not all at once. Throughout the day. This consistency is what produces the biological adaptations that protect your brain. The timeline for observing benefit is relatively quick. Within days to weeks of increasing daily movement, your energy improves. Your sleep quality improves. Your mood improves. After a month or more of consistent daily movement, your cognitive function noticeably improves. Your mental clarity increases. Your ability to concentrate increases. And after months and years of this pattern, the protective effect on your brain becomes substantial. People who maintain consistent daily movement experience significantly less cognitive decline as they age. They retain their mental sharpness. They remain capable, engaged, and mentally present in their lives. Comment below. How much daily movement do you currently accumulate? What opportunities exist in your daily routine to integrate more consistent movement? The seventh pattern involves understanding the critical role of circadian rhythm alignment in brain health, and recognizing that the modern environment has disrupted this alignment in ways that are damaging to cognition. Your brain operates on a 24-hour cycle, a circadian rhythm that is entrained primarily by light exposure. When you experience light in the morning, your circadian rhythm is set. When you experience darkness in the evening, your brain releases melatonin and prepares for sleep. This rhythm, when healthy and consistent, allows your brain to consolidate memories during sleep, to clear metabolic waste products through the glymphatic system, and to regulate inflammation throughout the day. In traditional Okinawan populations, circadian rhythm alignment was perfect and automatic. People woke with the sun. They were exposed to bright light throughout the day. As evening approached and the sun set, their light exposure decreased. Their brains released melatonin. They slept. The cycle was consistent, predictable, and biologically optimized. But in modern Western life, this alignment has been disrupted. People wake in artificial light, or in darkness, depending on their schedules. They spend the day indoors, away from natural light. In the evening, they are exposed to artificial light from screens, lights, and other sources. Their brains do not receive the signal that darkness is approaching. Melatonin is not released at the appropriate time. Sleep becomes disrupted. The circadian rhythm becomes dysregulated. The biological consequences of this dysregulation are profound. When your circadian rhythm is disrupted, memory consolidation, the process by which short-term memories are converted into long-term storage, is impaired. The glymphatic system does not function optimally, and metabolic waste products accumulate in your brain. Inflammation increases. The protective systems that normally repair neural damage and clear damaged proteins fail. Over time, cognitive function deteriorates. The brain becomes vulnerable to degeneration. This is one of the primary mechanisms by which modern life promotes cognitive decline. The practical application involves restructuring your light exposure to match your natural circadian rhythm. In the morning, seek bright light exposure immediately after waking. Go outside, if possible, or spend time in bright artificial light. This sets your circadian rhythm and improves alertness. Throughout the day, maintain exposure to natural light, either by working near windows or by spending time outdoors. In the evening, approximately 2 hours before sleep, begin reducing your light exposure. Dim the lights in your home. Reduce your exposure to screens, which emit short wavelength blue light that suppresses melatonin release. This might mean setting a specific time to stop using phones, tablets, or computers. Or it might mean wearing blue light blocking glasses in the evening. The goal is to create a signal to your brain that darkness is approaching, allowing your natural melatonin release to occur at the appropriate time. For sleep itself, the goal is 7 to 9 hours of consistent sleep, in a dark environment, with minimal disruptions. This means that your bedroom should be as dark as possible. This means that you should sleep at the same time each night, maintaining a consistent sleep schedule. This consistency is critical. Your body learns to release melatonin at a specific time if that time is consistent. It learns to be alert at a specific time if you wake at a consistent time. After a few weeks of maintaining this schedule, the transitions become automatic. You feel sleepy at your designated bedtime. You wake naturally at your designated wake time. And the quality of your sleep dramatically improves. The consequences of improving your circadian rhythm alignment appear relatively quickly. Within days to weeks, your sleep quality improves. Your daytime energy increases. Your mood stabilizes. Your cognitive function becomes noticeably sharper. After weeks and months of consistent circadian rhythm alignment, the protective effects on your brain become substantial. Memory improves. Mental clarity increases. The fog that might have characterized your afternoons lifts. And the long-term protective effect against cognitive decline becomes substantial. This is not hope or theory. This is observed outcome in populations that maintain circadian rhythm alignment. Comment below. Is your current sleep schedule consistent? Have you noticed changes in your mental clarity based on how much sleep you get or the quality of your sleep? The 8th pattern involves understanding that these 7 specific interventions, fish consumption, complex carbohydrate selection, fermented food intake, moderate protein consumption, processed food avoidance, consistent daily movement, and circadian rhythm alignment, do not function as separate, isolated strategies. They function as an integrated biological system. No single intervention produces the cognitive preservation observed in Okinawan centenarians. The explanation of their centenarian cognitive health requires understanding all 8 patterns together, and understanding how they interact and reinforce each other. Consider, for example, the relationship between fish consumption and blood glucose stability. Omega-3 fatty acids reduce inflammation. They improve insulin sensitivity. They make your metabolic system more responsive to the glucose stability provided by complex carbohydrates. Similarly, regular movement improves insulin sensitivity and metabolic function, which in turn means that the complex carbohydrates you consume produce smaller blood glucose spikes. The fermented foods improve your microbiome, which produces butyrate, which further reduces inflammation and improves insulin sensitivity. The circadian rhythm alignment improves sleep quality, which regulates the hormones that control hunger and metabolic function. The avoidance of processed foods removes compounds that would otherwise damage these carefully balanced systems. This is why people who adopt only one or two of these patterns rarely achieve the cognitive preservation observed in Okinawan populations. A person who eats fish but continues to consume refined carbohydrates may see modest benefit. A person who improves their sleep but continues to consume processed foods may experience some improvement in energy, but cognitive decline will continue. But a person who implements all 8 patterns, who eats fish consistently, who chooses complex carbohydrates, who consumes fermented foods, who moderates protein, who avoids processed foods, who moves daily, and who maintains circadian rhythm alignment, that person is creating a biological environment in their brain that is radically different from the environment created by typical Western lifestyle patterns. The timeline for experiencing the full protective effect is measured in months and years, not weeks. The first changes appear quickly. Within days to weeks, energy and mental clarity improve. Within weeks to months, deeper changes occur. Metabolic function stabilizes. Sleep quality improves. Cognitive clarity becomes more consistent. But the full protective effect, the resistance to cognitive decline that characterizes Okinawan centenarians, requires sustained adherence to all 8 patterns over years and decades. This is why age matters. A person who implements these patterns at 45 will experience far greater protection by the time they reach 75 than a person who begins at 65. But this is also a reason for hope. At any age, these patterns provide benefit. A person who implements these 8 interventions at 70 will experience measurable improvement in cognitive function and meaningful slowing of cognitive decline. A person at 80 who begins will slow the progression of their cognitive decline and maintain function longer. It is never too late to begin. It is simply that earlier implementation produces greater benefit. The framework for sustainable change requires that you think of this not as 8 separate diets or 8 separate health rules, but as a unified system. The goal is not to perfectly implement each strategy immediately. The goal is to understand the system, and then to gradually shift your daily patterns toward this system. You might begin by implementing fish consumption and circadian rhythm alignment. After a month, once these are stable, you might add complex carbohydrate selection. After another month, you might add fermented food consumption. By moving gradually, by building one pattern at a time, you avoid the overwhelm that causes people to abandon dietary change. And by the end of 6 months or a year, you have gradually shifted your entire lifestyle toward a pattern that preserves cognitive function. This is the approach that has worked for thousands of people who understand that their cognitive health is not determined by genetics or age, but by the daily choices they make about food, movement, light exposure, and sleep. It is the approach that is available to you. Now, if this information resonates with you, if you recognize that your cognitive health is something you have control over, that decline is not inevitable, and that the specific patterns of the Okinawan diet and lifestyle are patterns that you can implement in your own life, I want to encourage you to subscribe to this channel. I will be releasing videos on the specific foods that protect your cardiovascular system, on the sleep practices that repair your brain tissue, on the movement patterns that preserve your physical strength and balance, and on the medical research that continues to validate these observations in centenarian populations. This is not information that will be easy to find in mainstream media or in typical medical advice. But it is information that matters. And it is information that will change your life if you are willing to implement it. Also, I would encourage you to like this video. If the explanation of how these patterns protect your brain made sense to you, if you found yourself thinking about changes you want to make in your own life, let me know by liking this video. The algorithm works in ways that determine whether more people see this information or whether it remains unknown. Your like helps ensure that more people have access to this content. And in a world where cognitive decline is increasingly common, where medical systems focus on managing decline rather than preventing it, Your engagement helps spread information that can change lives. Finally, I want to invite you to comment below. What resonates most strongly with you? What pattern do you think would be easiest for you to implement first? What challenges do you anticipate in making these changes? Your comments help me understand what aspects of this information are most important to you, and your comments help other viewers see that they are not alone in wanting to make these changes. Community matters. Knowing that other people are undertaking this same journey matters. So comment below. Share your thoughts. Tell me what you intend to change. In my next video, I will be discussing the specific mechanisms by which these dietary patterns protect your heart and cardiovascular system. I will be examining the blood pressure benefits that Okinawan centenarians experience, and showing you how the same 8 patterns that protect your brain also create cardiovascular health that allows you to remain active and vital into your oldest years. Subscribe so that you do not miss this content.